I cannot believe I cornered Adam Black. I'm a little disappointed, Adam. I got to be honest. And that is normally you have like these freaking rock and roll t-shirt and you've just come from working out and, I got to be on my P's and Q's because it looks like you're going to take me down to Chinatown. And now you're all nice and cleaned up. I know it's a facade, but you look fantastic today.
Well, thank you. Well, I'm sure we'll get to it, but I had to put the t-shirts, the rock and roll t-shirts away when I left Google and moved over to the private equity finance, investment, real estate world, right? Had to clean up my act a little bit, which is I know we're going to talk about leadership a lot today, but that's a good leadership lesson that we can kind of talk about is how you present yourself to others, right?
Yeah, it is. You want to make sure, you're authentic and true. But one of the things that I've learned about myself, and, I've been at my organization for a long time. You and I have worked together in the past. I never want to be unauthentic, but I may need to narrow or open the aperture, as we know, depending upon the audience and the situation. And maybe we just start with that. Like, how did you get into, everybody has a unique path on how they get into critical infrastructure in general, data centers specifically. How did you get involved in our industry?
That's a great question. So I grew up in Atlanta, went to a private school in Atlanta that my parents sacrificed a lot to put me through with hopes that I would be the first person in our family that went to college and finished college and kind of took that career path or any career path that was,
right,
required a college education. So that's what I did. Went to Georgia Tech, did my undergrad at Georgia Tech. When I graduated from Georgia Tech, I actually had plans to go on the mission field with my wife, which was quite a departure from, I think, how my parents kind of envisioned. They weren't upset about it, but it was quite a departure from how they envisioned our future. And just one of those things, it just didn't really work out. My wife was in seminary. I was moved up to Tennessee to work while she was finishing up her last year of seminary so we could go do this. And I couldn't find a job. And we had this really big decision point, literally just a couple of months after we got married, which is a hard thing to happen right when you start your relationship off and say, we had this plan for our future. Are we going to do this? And if we're going to do it, if we're going to double down and make this thing happen, we're going to be charging up the credit cards. We're going to be making irresponsible financial decisions. And missionaries don't get paid a ton of money. So
right.
We had this decision point, and I had a job offer back in Atlanta at a big mechanical contractor where my dad worked and where I had interned and worked summers while I was in college. And looking back on things, we absolutely made the right decision, decided to hang that vision up. Maybe not forever.
Right.
One day we might get back to it, who knows, but hang that up at that time, come back and enter into the workforce. So I went to work for a big mechanical contractor named Mallory & Evans. To my knowledge, they're not doing a ton of like big new builds right now. They're more in the service and retrofit type industry. And here they're trying to make a comeback. So best wishes to those guys. But through that experience at Mallory & Evans, I got a lot of experience with industrial projects. So my very first construction project ever was the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta in Midtown. When they did the replacement bank, they moved it from downtown to where Music Midtown used to be. And so I was kind of sad to see that area go, but it was also a really cool construction project. And from there, I moved into full-time employment with those guys, and I started doing industrial projects. Fast forward a few years, as I got through that, I left Mallory & Evans, and I went to work for a bank. And this bank was a faith-based organization that loaned money out to churches and faith-based organizations for construction projects. And some of those organizations had very robust teams that could help manage that. Some of them had nothing. So the role as a construction cost manager kind of morphed into, I was a design manager. I helped people through the entire process in some instances. And sometimes I was the guy that just showed up and took pictures to validate pay applications, right? So that was a really interesting ride. And then the credit crisis happened in 2007, 2008. I got laid off from that job, and I went back into the construction industry working for Johnson Controls. So my first two projects with Johnson Controls were data center projects in the Atlanta area. And I fell in love with it immediately. I said, this is awesome. This is what the future is all about. This is what I want to do.
Mhm.
And the rest of my tenure at Johnson Controls, I never touched another data center project. I did a lot of really cool stuff that was quite applicable to this industry. A lot of, nanotechnology research facilities, a lot of laboratories, a lot of energy projects, things that really widened my skill set and prepared me for what I'm doing. But I always had that dream of getting back to data centers, right? So I bounced around for a few years after I decided to leave Johnson. I went and worked for Eaton Corporation for a while, which was another good education in power and energy. Um, I went to DLB Associates, which I didn't do a ton of data center work with those guys, but it was so data center adjacent that it gave me a taste. And then I actually came and joined you guys at QTS
That's right.
for a period of time. And that was my first full-time data center gig going on 12 years ago now. Got recruited away from QTS to Facebook when they were having their big boom in that time frame, which when those guys call one of these tech companies from
Sure.
Silicon Valley calls, you take the call, and it worked out, and it was a great ride there. I got tired of all the travel that I was doing, and then I left Facebook. I was living in North Carolina, left there, moved up to Northern Virginia, where I've been for the last almost 8 years now. Took a job with Google as their data center construction lead for the Mid-Atlantic region, delivered a lot of capacity up here for them. And then late last year, I left and joined TA Realty, moving back to the developer side of the house, leading the design and construction efforts for this team. So to answer your question a little more succinctly, I kind of had construction in the blood. So my grandfather worked for McKinney's, who I know you're familiar with, as a big mechanical contractor in Atlanta. My dad, when he got out of the Navy after Vietnam, he went to work for McKinney's as well and built a career. He's actually still working now. He's 77 years old, still working in the data center industry specifically, which is pretty cool. And I guess I just got it honest from the lineage of the family that I was meant to be a construction guy.
One of the things I loved where you started with that whole story. So all of that came from you and your bride having this conversation. And, when God intervenes, many times he remains anonymous, but the evidence is what's my aptitude and my attitude aligned with.
Right.
And whether that's your faith tradition or not, but when the universe, you and I see things a particular way, I think very similarly, but you see these intersections, and when you pursue them, and I'm sure as you went through those things, there were successes and not successes. There were lumps, things that you had to learn, and we'll get into some of the leadership stuff that is near and dear to both of our hearts. But you can see as you look back at this, 20-year journey that you've described, your parents were preparing you, you were being prepared, didn't know exactly how it was going to work out. And it's just as you remain nimble, then you see this journey coming through. It's just a great testimony, and it's just a journey today. You are a missionary of some sort today, at least I'm sure privately, but wherever that journey goes, whether it's in critical infrastructure that we're in or other more specific things, it's just really cool to hear those stories when people are able to coincidentally end up in these paths. Because more often than not, part of my story is when I refused to listen and I said, no, I'm going to do it this way. I ultimately got moved back to the path, but usually with way more adjustments, that I needed to have because I wasn't attentive. But thanks for sharing that story. That's pretty that's pretty powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, so, lumps and ups and downs are a given in any industry, any job. I think I'm not really sure I believe in the concept of luck too much. Luck is the interception of, preparedness and willingness to take some
opportunity.
Risk.
Yeah.
But I do feel like at many points in my career, I've just kind of been in the right place at the right time.
Right.
And it's worked out well. And the moves that I've made have worked out well from a professional and a personal standpoint. And you just have to be open to kind of feeling that flow in your life and really understanding, okay, is this an opportunity worth investigating, and what's my risk appetite, and really kind of look at it critically and say, okay, I think I'm going to try this out. My son is 18. He just graduated from high school and he's in his first semester of college right now. He pretty much hates it, to be honest. And he's looking for something else, something where he can be a little more impactful more immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've told him 100 times is, hey, I'm an overeducated guy. At that time when I was at Johnson Controls, I went and got my master's degree, and I'm going to tell you something that's potentially controversial coming from your dad and coming from a guy who's got a graduate degree.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really cares. College doesn't matter as much as it used to. Hard work and grit and know-how matter more than anything else. And on top of that, you can reinvent yourself as many times as you want. You don't have to do the same thing forever. Now, even though I've done construction since the beginning of my career, I don't necessarily believe that I've done the same thing my entire career, because I've built a lot of different stuff. Now, the last 10 or 12 years have been fully dedicated to data center construction, but also it's the thing that I enjoy the most. Right. So I could go out and build anything, but I really like this more than the other stuff. So you find your path and don't be afraid to take those risks and reinvent yourself.
Let me ask you about that just real quick, about data centers. One of the reasons I didn't know this was going to be my tribe of people, this is not my interview, but I've talked many times sort of about my path. But one of the things I realized over time was it wasn't just that I had an aptitude, because I started in the colo IT space of data centers and then moved over about a decade or so into the data center proper. By that, I just mean the dev and in construction, whatever side of it. But I found that I love the tribe of people. The people that stick and do the most, whatever, introvert, extrovert, wherever they are in this, I find that more often you and I do a lot of events. We have a lot of conversations. And I find that regularly the people that sort of stick through these things, ebbs and flows, are the kind of people I enjoy being around, regardless of how they present, sort of their personality or whatever. There's this common grit there. Is that one of the reasons why you think not just the construction and the unique innovation that you've had to, at the scale and speed in particular that we're dealing with now, but just the tribe of people that tend to be the day-to-day people that you interact with in our world?
I think I've come to appreciate that more over time. Initially, it was the fast pace, the big projects, and the fact that you never, even though it's a data center, you never really built the same thing twice.
Right.
I was attracted to that from a complexity standpoint and a technical standpoint. But you're right. Over the years, you develop that close-knit group of people. And this is, even though there's a boom right now in our business, it is a very tight, close-knit community. Everybody knows everybody. You gotta be careful who you upset and the decisions that you make and how they can reverberate into the future, because it is a very small industry. And it's got the best people in the world. I would submit that of all the types of construction I've ever done, the people who are really invested in what we do, they think differently. And it's partially the advancements in technology, and it's partially the speed, and really, I think overall people who are invested in this, they understand the mission of what we're trying to accomplish. I love nothing more than getting up in front of a crew of construction workers and asking questions like, hey, raise your hand if your family's been impacted by cancer in any way, shape, or form. Almost every hand in the audience goes up, right?
Right.
And then I get to say things like, do you know what you're building here? Do you know why you're coming to work every day? Do you understand AI? Do you understand the advancements in medical care that are going to come out of this industry? You are taking part in something that's way bigger than yourself. And you should be proud of that. You should come to work in the right mindset. You should come to work with a quality mindset and a safety mindset as a result. I want you to go home better than you showed up today, meaning with all your digits and extremities, with a little extra jingle in your pocket and a sense of accomplishment, because maybe you're not a doctor, maybe you're not a researcher, but you're enabling those guys to do good work that's going to impact all of us well. And that the people who understand that are 10 times more passionate about this industry than the people who don't. And it takes time to get there. It takes, if I'd stuck around the developer world, I think it would have taken me a lot longer to realize that. But when I got into some of those tech companies, I'm really starting to see the power behind the infrastructure that we're creating every day.
Yeah. And this ties back again, I think, so we literally just had this conversation, we said offline. We've got Every so many months, we have an inductee class of new people in our organization. And I spoke to that this morning. And it used to be a lot of our conversation was around the speeds and feeds, the technical details, easily half of my talk with them. And we indoctrinate every new group that we come around. Why, you and I would say it this way: always be prepared to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. Like, why are you connected to this thing? And when people learn that easily a third of the world's not connected to the internet, well, what does that have to do? Well, if you're in a part of the world that's impoverished, how do you raise yourself out of poverty? How do you get to a different kind of education? MIT puts free online classes. If I want to go, if my country's in turmoil and I want to go to another country, how do I get connected to learn another language? Or we could run through so many examples from not just the jingle. That's important. At the end of the day, if I'm hungry or thirsty or whatever, it's hard for me to focus on anything else. So that has to be resolved. But then as we move up into the higher order of things, so we just try to connect people to these things. Yeah. And the reason why that's important, not just for themselves, we're in the news a lot these days. I keep hearing how there's a lot, what I think is inaccurate information around taking resources from communities, from whatever. And so how do we then educate ourselves? Well, is this true about us? Are we, because we don't want to be a negative impact. We want to be a positive impact. And so when we can educate our constituency, our internal, because I don't want them to be misled. I don't want to be misunderstood. I want to get them aligned to the mission in a truthful, integrity way. And then at least, even if they're that mechanical on the floor engineer maintaining an air handler or a new water distribution unit or whatever, they may not be an evangelist like you and I are to some degree. But if they can explain why they're connected to a mission when they go into a community that we're developing, and people can help connect, like you just articulated, why this is important, not only change their lives, it helps to change their community around them life. And
exactly.
I think anyway, I know we're going to talk about that more today, but I think that's super important. And well, anyway, let me just, because I'll go on and on and on. You said something, I've heard you say this before, and I love this, where you talk about like this leadership mindset. So however you want to approach this, whether it's the big idea of leadership to you, but when you think of leadership mindset, and the reason why I want to talk about leadership today, one, you're very good at articulating it. I've heard you speak about this many times. I know it's a passion of yours. It's a passion of mine. But there's a lot of, if you're not grounded and centered, as the pressure of speed and scale and whatever presses against us, not just in life, but in our industry, you might find yourself in a conundrum trying to make decisions in real time that should already be resolved. So what do you mean by leadership mindset?
In my mind, it's pretty simple, and it kind of boils down to one thing.
Okay.
Leadership is service to others.
Okay.
So if you're a leader, and I would also submit that everyone is a leader, we can get to that and kind of dig into that a little bit more. If you're a leader and you have an outward focus, then you're going to succeed. If you're a leader and you have an inward focus, then your decisions are going to be biased towards yourself, and that's no way to win.
Right.
So from a team standpoint, a leader's got to have followers. Leaders need to be followers as well. But if you're a leader and you've got people on your team, let's say at the site construction level, you're a superintendent or a foreman, and you've got a crew of people who are out there working, putting in the work. It's your job to focus on them first. And in a perfect world, which we don't live in, that means that you don't have to think about your own interests at all. If you're moving roadblocks out of the way, you're moving the rocks out of their path so they can go execute their job safely and with a high level of quality, on time and on budget, meeting all the specified requirements of whatever task is at hand, then all your needs are taken care of as a leader. So in my mind, it's that mentality. The leadership mentality is one of, how do I support? How do I guide? How do I enhance the productivity and the experience of those people around me on my team?
We do a class here called, we have a program, servant leadership program. And For some people, it's intuitive. For others, it's not. Part of that program is also like, where do I, like, what's a practical way for me to measure myself? How do I develop this mindset? For some people, it's like, it is intuitive, or I want to say it's intuitive, but it's a natural. For others, they have to learn it. I don't mean that they're unethical or whatever, but depending upon, you come from a family tradition that it sounds like we can already tell poured some of this into you. There's community around you. That's not the case for all of us.
Right.
And we also, we have our rebellious, whether it's at work or in private or wherever, it's, our nature. So when you think about leadership mindset, when you have these conversations, like, how did you develop that beyond what we've already talked about? But when you start getting into the pressures of doing your job, like, how do you empty into your mind these ideas and things, or feed yourself so that you can really start building that muscle?
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is kudos to you guys for having leadership training. That is something that not enough organizations do enough of. I firmly believe that leaders are made and trained and not born. Now, you have your outliers, your Winston Churchills, right?
Sure.
Who just kind of naturally understood it a little bit better than others. But no matter where you are on that spectrum, leadership is a skill that can be trained. It can be exercised just like a muscle, and you can grow it and you can get better at it. So for me, I kind of just realized through empirical evidence, the decisions that I would make that went poorly throughout my career were inwardly focused decisions. Mm-hmm. And I think with just age and maturity and time in the industry, I started to see, man, if I'm thinking about myself too much and my own performance, I have to hit these numbers at whatever expense, or this schedule at whatever expense, no matter how hard I grind on my team. That's no way to lead, because maybe you win the battle, but you lose the war, right? Mm-hmm. So I started to think that way, and then I would make decisions that were outward focused decisions that supported other people, supported the team, and I saw big wins, long-term wins over time. But I didn't really have a language to put around that. I wouldn't have been able to clearly articulate that. And then I read this book. So I have a prop here, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willing, which have you read it?
I haven't, but I've listened to him talk about it many times.
I'll send you a copy. It's a fantastic book, and there's a follow-up book and a couple other books in their series. And these guys had it figured out, and they put a language and a framework around what it means to be a leader who knows how to prioritize, who knows how to balance, who knows how to have that outward focus while still maintaining guidelines and standards and a high standard, and kind of put that into play. And one of the things that these guys teach, and I've become friends with these guys and friends with their organization and gone through a lot of training with them in the last few years. One of the things that they enable through some of their writings is that self-assessment piece that you're asking about. How do you understand where you're out of balance as a leader? Do you give too much leeway and not enforce the standard? Or are you so focused on the standard and enforcement of that standard that you're not agile? Decisions like that. So they put a framework around that. And I would have to say that once I read that book, and once I went through some of their programs and training, my capability of leadership and my understanding of where I was before, kind of looking back on the things that I had done before, and the good and the bad, really came into focus and helped me elevate myself as a leader.
Yeah. It's I love that framework because I haven't seen that one specifically, so I'm looking forward to reading it. But if you don't have a fixed point of reference, like, how do you navigate? Like, how do you measure? How do you adjust if it's fluid? It's impossible.
And to that point, with using a military example, talking to an Army guy here, what's the most important piece of information on a map? Everybody's got a different answer for that, but there's one real answer. What is it? What do you think it is?
The most important is, where am I at right now?
Exactly. You have to know where you're at. You have to understand yourself. You have to understand who you are, what matters to you, your own standards, your own guidelines. Once you can understand that and articulate that, then you can start to apply some of these leadership skills and tactics to elevate your team.
as a kid who started my Army career before they got irritated and kicked me out in a Pathfinder unit, if I had failed that, I'd be in even bigger trouble. I had Velcro on my stripes. It was, if I could go back, I used to, one of the things for me, just on a side note, probably the first 20 years after I got out of the Army, I was so angry at that first probably 24 months because I felt like my leaders failed me. And now the last couple 20 years since then, it's not them at all. And I'm not trying to be a martyr. Like, it's just me. I went in because I had issues with authority. So to escape authority, I joined airborne infantry. How genius is that? Got introduced to wall-to-wall counseling about 7 minutes after I got there. But I would list out all these reasons why, and I'm not going to go into them, but why it was their fault for my experience. And my last third or so of my time was a great time. And I thought, oh, these guys are much better leaders. Not necessarily. And I'm not going to denigrate one or elevate the other. But my perspective through a lot of hard lumps. Some people learn quicker and easier and better. God in his patience with me kept disciplining me. Not always, wasn't always hard, but it was relentless. And just took me a while to realize, man, stop looking outside. This is you.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
the first place to look when your team has a failure or whatever is in the mirror, right?
Yeah.
Like, what did I do?
Right.
What decision did I make? What did I push on that didn't set this team up for success? Did I not give them enough training? Was it not clear enough in the requirement? And when you go there, and it truly has to be about you. And you don't do this as a tactic to say, hey, guys, I'm sorry, this is my fault. You have to be genuine about that. And you have to say, I understand what happened. Here's what happened. Here's the impact to you and to the business, to the team. Here's what we're going to do about it going forward. That's the ownership component. Ownership doesn't stop with just saying, hey, guys, my bad. I screwed up. Sorry. You have to follow that up with, I screwed up. I understand that this screw up that I made, this bad decision I made required you to spend 2 weekends away from your family working Saturdays and Sundays. And that's unacceptable. We're never going to do it again. And I can say that confidently because I've put this new plan in place, these requirements in place that will prevent this. What do you guys think about it? And have that kind of dialogue back and forth. But yeah, part of being a good leader outside of, the servant mindset is really taking a really hard, honest look at yourself in the mirror and truly owning the failures and owning the decision. And then when you have wins, is it you or is it the team?
That's right.
You have to give those wins to the team because it's not about you. It's all on your shoulders, but it's not about you. It's about them.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I wasn't a leader then, but one of the things I learned really quickly was when they said, are there any questions? Most of the time that was rhetorical and they're not looking for an argument. So it took me a while to learn that. It was pretty funny. Sergeant, do you really think we need to do all these push-ups? I don't. And who gives people tree outfits? Like, this is the stupidest thing I ever wore them out pretty quickly. Hey, look, I don't want to pivot, but I want to narrow in because I know we've only got about 30 something more minutes, but I'm really curious about this. When you're applying this now, so in our world, in your world, in the construction world, I'm almost tired of the word unprecedented because when we were building out transportation systems for railroads, we said this is unprecedented. We were building out the telegraph, like communication systems and these things. We're like, this is unprecedented. There is nothing in human history that is at speed, scale, global investment, whatever, at least that I'm familiar with. And perhaps this is the arrogance of any generation saying the thing that we're in, when we were building out the atomic bomb or whatever, but it really is a pretty spectacular moment in time. And that brings with it, as you're thinking about leadership, with the scale, the speed, the complexity, the risk-taking and making decisions, because you may not have the full, mission in front of you. When we're barracks training in the military, I got the Geneva Convention, I got the Uniform Code of Military Justice. We can blow a whistle to stop the exercise. Like, I've got some parameters. And the reason why we train so hard in barracks time or peacetime is so that when I go to God forbid, I go to combat or I'm in a real live mission situation, things are muscle memory because there's a thing, fog of war, commander's intent, and I need to be able to operate lawfully within parameters to accomplish the mission and take care of my troops. So not a perfect analogy, but in our world where we're real time action on the ground and it's not at the same pace as it was even 5 years ago, how do you bring this leadership mindset to own decisions, to inform your team so they can operate under your commander's intent and move forward, accomplishing the things that we need to with maybe, only 75 to 80% of the data. And by the way, we both know, because we talk about it all the time, how the requirements can change pretty regularly real time. And that's a newer phenomenon than even just a few years ago. So how do you bring this mindset to that scenario?
Yeah. I don't like the word unprecedented either. So I'm glad you went through that discussion, because I don't think anything we're doing is unprecedented. It's just a different flavor in a different industry of things that we've dealt with before. So that said, we can learn a lot of lessons from history of other industrial revolutions and technical revolutions in the world and see where did they fail? Where did they go wrong? So that's one thing, is kind of the backward look of, well, at what risk did we take on that was too much? Where was that tipping point of how much risk is too much risk? You think about all the lives that were lost building railroads through the Rockies, or it's damming up the Colorado River. Was that acceptable then? It's certainly not acceptable now. It probably wasn't really acceptable then, especially if you ask the families that were impacted by those things. So looking back at that and saying, okay, what's really driving us? You really understanding that. It all kind of comes back to the why, right? Why are we here? What are we doing? If you can clearly articulate that and clearly articulate the mission, that's 80% of that commander's intent that you mentioned. It's okay. I know why I'm here. The guy on the bucket out on the job site, the ubiquitous guy on a bucket with a screwdriver in his hand. His definition of why he's there is different than mine. And I need to understand his definition just as he needs to understand my definition. We need to meet in the middle on that. So clear communication, I think, is the first step. Really clearly articulating, why are we doing this? What's the goal? What's the outcome? And make sure people understand that, because like I said, I'm an overeducated data center nerd. I can get up in front of a bunch of construction workers, even though I've turned tools in my past. I can get up in front of a bunch of construction workers to talk about all the awesome stuff we do. And sometimes it's in one ear and out the other. We also have things like the language barrier in our industry that we have to combat, right? So making sure that people really understand why they're there is step number one. And then step number two is really just a 100% total commitment from leadership that you want everybody to win. So I can finish a job on budget and on schedule. That may look like a win, but in my definition, it's not a win unless all of my trade contractors walk away making their margins, making as much money as they had planned to make on the job, so they can support their business, support their teams. And it's a holistic team that's delivering these large scale projects. And if people don't walk away with a smile on their face, meeting their own personal goals, I can't consider it a win if I win and somebody else loses. This shouldn't be a zero-sum game like that. Right. So really demonstrating those kinds of decisions. And I think it really comes to life in safety as we start to drive faster, more complicated projects. If we're not willing to invest in the things to keep the workforce safe, then they're just gonna say these guys only care about money. They only care about their own business. They don't care about us. So you have to kind of peel back those layers and really understand what does a win look like for everybody on the team, and the decisions you make have to be filtered through that to make sure that they're supportive of what everybody's goals are. That keeps everybody on the same page. It makes sure that things run smoothly and that people feel respected and people feel like they're actually part of the team instead of under your thumb as a leader.
I completely agree. I mean, it has to start with safety. It's kind of like for human flourishing, it starts with breathing, right? If you got to have air. That's the number one. You don't have air, we're done in about a minute. Then you got to have water, and so you got to have sleep. You got to have these things, and it's not that one's, you got to have them all to thrive. but it's, where it starts. One is the definition, like you described, and it's a culture. And really, one of the things where we see the organizations that are the most successful, not perfect, we're not going to accomplish perfection, but the most successful are where they've defined it. And it's an attitude from the boardroom
Yes.
down. And I know you and I are saying it, and the cynics that are listening to this are going to just be that. And I've got a lot of healthy skepticism just in life in general. We've been around a while, but I just think it's an undeniable truth. It's from the boardroom all the way down. You might be able to rally your non-coms or your lower intermediate for a little while, but if it is not up and down the chain of command, if it's not a culture of this, it's just not going to last. Like it will, people will be able to look at not what you say, but what you do and what the results and your reaction to misses. And that will change everything. It has changed everything. We know great organizations that have risen and been successful and others that have fallen away because they didn't have from the top to the bottom, maybe not everybody, but the overwhelming majority having that mindset.
I think another piece of it, and this is more of a tactical approach and something that anybody listening to this can try out on their own. And I've done this hundreds of times and I submit that it works, is the concept of detachment. So if you're out on your job site, which is a very dynamic, challenging environment, there are problems that are being solved every day, whether you know about it or not, as a top level leader, and people are too focused on the problem, then you can't get outside that problem. It's like when you're taking the SAT, they tell you, hey, if you get stuck on a math problem, skip it, go to the next one, then come back. Like you have to be able to detach from those problematic situations. And sometimes if you're I've been in contentious meetings before where people are hyper focused on a problem. Everybody's around the table leaning in like this. They're all talking about it. I will literally stand up, take one step back, lean against the trailer wall and just observe what's happening. Soak it in. And it completely reframes your mindset. If people don't see that kind of leadership from the top down, we're not focused on just the problems. We're focused on the big picture here. Yes, we want to solve this problem, but the way through the problem is not to neglect everything else and focus on the problem. Yeah, that's right. I keep coming back to safety because I'm passionate about it, but you have somebody do something and they get hurt on the job. Maybe they twist their ankle. Not a huge deal, not a recordable or whatever, but if you pour in too much on that, you're going to start missing things that are happening elsewhere on the jobs that are leading indicators of maybe even worse situations. And the same thing holds true with schedule problems, budget problems, quality problems, contractors not getting along, whatever. You have to be able to kind of step back from that situation, take a breath, look around, see what's going on, and say, hey, we're fighting a bigger battle here.
Right.
We need to fix this, but the way to fix it might not be to focus all of our energy on this one thing right now. Right. Yeah. And that's part of that culture that I think really starts to flow down into your frontline workers, your frontline leaders, because they're leaders too. They're leading up the chain of command. They're the ones doing the work. They're leading the work. When they start to think that way, then their problem solving gets better. Their collaboration gets better. All those things get better, but it has to start at the top. And this also ties to that ownership mindset that I referenced earlier, where when a problem happens, if a guy gets hurt, steps off something and twists his ankle, I'm not looking at that guy saying, you did something bad, you got hurt, you're going to go home without pay for 2 days as a punishment for this. We're going to say, hey, I'm sorry you got hurt. Are you okay? First of all, but let's really evaluate this and look holistically and see, does our culture support your safe performance of this work? What can we do to enable you to work safer and have that two-way conversation? Let them lead up to you. That's a really important concept.
Well, I haven't read the book. I've listened to Jocko speak and other SEALs and people in that special operator space. What's really cool is they have this framework that you're talking about. It's a full contact sport. Like, I don't know, other than what they're doing, a more full contact sport than that. So it's not, one of the things they do is just that. First of all, they build in this incredible esprit de corps. You've got to have that esprit de corps.
Yeah.
And that's a wide range of personality and talent or whatever, but you've got that center. The second thing, in no particular order, the second thing, though, is that look, I am genuinely concerned whether this is a procedural thing, a lack of clarity, whatever the however we got here, you're injured. I'm focusing in on that. And first and foremost, for you as an individual. And secondly, and I don't think it's wrong, to support the team. And so let's make sure you're good. Let's get you patched. Let's get you whatever that looks like. And then let's evaluate as we can, right? What they say as pilots, don't sit there and troubleshoot a whole bunch of stuff. If lights are going on, fly the plane, because you'll crash right into the ground. If some anomaly happens and you stop flying the plane, fly the plane. Once you get to stable, hopefully landed or stable, then start working through the other things, but fly the plane. And that's what they're saying essentially, is to do this.
Yeah.
And then we evaluate, is this a procedural thing? Is there a lack of information? Because there are sometimes, I've had this happen to me, where I didn't follow, I was going off of intuition. I got complacent. I didn't follow the established path. There's a reason why we've got rules and regulations and whatever, because we've been there. We know. One of my very first significant accidents I saw as a kid was I was learning to rappel. I was in this airborne unit, and they were coming out of Huey. So we're watching these guys. And our safety officer, who gave the demo and everything, he watched some of these hotshot kids come out, and they were amazing. They'd just come from air assault school, and he was going to show us, I'm a hotshot kid too, but he hadn't rappelled in about 11 months. And so he didn't follow his own procedures. And when you rappel, I don't know if you've ever done this. I don't remember. I want to say it was a 40 or 50 foot out of the Huey. So this is a long time ago. But a rope will stretch on you.
Yeah.
And when he came in to do his braking, he didn't accommodate for that. He was a little bit showing off, and he pancaked right in front of us into the ground. And it's not funny, but as I look back on it now, thankfully he was not permanently seriously injured, but they just flew one out, flew the medevac in, scooped him up, flew him away. And they were like, all right, back in there. I was like, it was a different army then. But my point is that it wasn't the protocol. It wasn't the whatever. The safety officer didn't follow his own things. And so there are some times where the evaluation is, first we took care of him. The medics treated him, and he spent some time healing up from that. So you got to follow those things, but you got to create the framework. You got the top to bottom. And I know we keep reference to the military because I just think they're so, not perfect, but so good at it. They're also great at command and control. One of the things that I know you're passionate about is communication. So you've got these procedures. One of the things that, there are a lot of loyal people to their countries all over the world, but one of the things we do the best, if not the best, is our command and control on how we train, drill, or whatever. We do these repeatable things where it's safe and in this controlled environment. We test each other, our brother and sister to the left and to the right of us, and then hold each other accountable. And then we operate within that sphere. And organizations have to be committed to that. And that's why I'm curious, because we've got speed, energy, costs, all of these things going. And if you're not purposeful around that, it'll start slipping out of control. And then it's not a sprained ankle. Our number one goal has to be everybody goes home with everything they brought to the job site, goes home with them. And it can get out of control. And you're dealing with high voltage. You're dealing with a lot of infrastructure coming and going. And that really has to be a mantra.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Let me ask you this. How do you, when you think about, so we've talked about a lot of this, when you, just in your role, how do you start looking around and identifying not just people that can be led, but people that might be good leaders? Because I think, yes, it's a muscle that can be taught, but there are some people that are really attracted to it. I'm sure you've got an experience with this where we may have the number one concrete person or firewall person or whatever. They're amazing. But when you put them in charge of people, they're not, it's not an intellectual ability. They just don't fit that as well as they do a process or a procedure or whatever.
Right.
And that's not a moral failing. It's just, it just doesn't fit. So how do you look around and find people, identify them, and then start grooming them to get them into a program?
So the initial identification of that mindset requires you to take a risk on somebody, put them in that leadership position and see how they do. And something that's not critical, from a safety perspective, or in our world from a scheduler cost perspective, like, hey, I'm gonna give you this, and I want to see what you can do with it.
Mhm.
And you observe, and you start to gauge where they are on that spectrum of leadership capability. Are they at the bottom and they've got a lot of things to learn and a long way to go, or are they pretty good? Or are they maybe the Winston Churchill of the
Mhm.
concrete world, and they're like ready to rock and roll, and they're made for it. Uh, but you have to take a risk. You have to find people, and really, I would say you need to do this with everybody.
Mhm.
You need to put them in a position that challenges their leadership capability and evaluate that and see where they are. Give them that feedback, see how they respond to the feedback, and let that guide what kind of role you put them in to continue to grow their leadership capability. So I believe that every single person is a leader to some degree. They're good
Mhm.
leaders and bad leaders, right? Some people say, there's no bad teams, there's only bad leaders. I really believe that. I think some elite leadership can be negative as well. There are plenty of examples in history of strong leaders that led large populations of people to do some awful things. That's leadership as well. And a lot of the ways that they did that and were able to accomplish those awful things are consistent with what we've talked about today. Understanding why, letting people lead, giving them the autonomy that they need to start to figure some of these things out for themselves and be evaluated by upper leadership. But as a leader, when you do that and you take that risk, you say, okay, I'm going to give you this. You've got to watch. You've got to be really careful. And people will set themselves at a point on that leadership spectrum. And then
Mhm.
you can make the decision, hey, is this guy or gal ready for the next step? And what can I do to pour that into them? Typically, it's additional responsibilities and some training to go along with it. Because as I said earlier, leadership's a skill. It can be trained. Anybody can learn it. You can get better at it as long as you're willing to sweat today so you don't bleed tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
That's the way I do it. And I challenge trade contractors on my job. It's to do the same thing. I know I keep coming back to safety, but where I'm going to come back to it again. You start having nagging little injuries and different things on the job. You start to evaluate pre-task plans, and you look and you say, okay, who is running that pre-task plan process? And without fail, almost every time you dig in, you see that the crew foreman is running the pre-task plan process.
Mm.
Well, one of the ways to get out of that infinite loop of people not understanding the hazards and the task is to say, hey, you're not leading this anymore. We're gonna give it to this fourth year apprentice over here. We're gonna let him run the pre-task plan. He needs to learn how to do this anyway. We're gonna let him do it. Then you get a different perspective. You see how they perform. People start to listen differently. Those are some of the tactics I use and have been successful with to kind of identify where people are and how to guide them. It's never yes or no, you're a leader, you're not a leader. Everybody's a leader, but wherever you're at, you need a different level of care and a different level of training to take the next steps on that spectrum. So identifying where they are and then figuring out how to get them the training and the experience that they need to increase their leadership capacity is the approach that I take.
I love that. When once upon a time, I led the solution engineering group here, and as we grew, it's a national program. We had different product sets, et cetera. And it couldn't just be led by me. We had to have different managers. And what we would do is there were people who I thought would be a good leader. And there were people who had a desire. And by that, I meant lead people, not just process, lead people. And so we would put them in that role for 90 days, 180 days, where there was, I don't want to say there was no pressure, but there was a back out plan. If this is not what you expect or what we expect, here's your job. And I know that doesn't work for everybody, but it worked fantastic for us. So we let a number of people experiment. We had some surprise successes. We had some surprises that weren't failures, but they're like, this is way more of a commitment or an emotional roller coaster or whatever than I want. I'm really good at managing my customers and a solution and a whatever. Managing these people is harder for me. It's more stressful than I really want to find myself, and no amount of money. We had other people who were like, look, I love managing this group of people, and their people love to be led by them, even if they gave up a couple points of income or whatever, but they're managing groups of people and not spreadsheets and
Yeah.
topics and whatever. And I think it's one of the things, and I've seen this happen in other places. Now people are finding their groove and they're all in. A lot of times you'll see this in the hospital where the chief of staff is a doctor, but they're really good at managing other doctors. You don't want them in the surgery room, and the surgeons don't want to manage other doctors. They want to do surgeries. And
Yeah.
so you can find that.
Yeah. In the leadership there, if you're a doer and not a manager, you still have responsibility to lead up the chain of command to your leader, which means open and clear, transparent communication, making sure that you understand and can pick up what they're laying down. You know, do it a read back, asking the questions, really getting a deep understanding of what success looks like to them, so you can find your way to enhance that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I know we're coming up on time. I guess as we wrap up today, as you think about it, what do you think is the biggest risk, whether it's in our industry or not, with maintaining a culture, developing and maintaining a culture of that? And two, you've got a junior person or an intermediate person, somebody who's not really led and is curious and interested in it, but doesn't want to fail. Like it can be intimidating.
Sure.
And if it's not intimidating, I don't know that I want to put them into my leadership program. I want them to, we're trusting not to be melodramatic lives, careers, or whatever, even if you're going to be directly in these people's path. And so I want you to be helping them flourish, and you should take that as a great responsibility. So what do you think, in whatever way you want to answer it, the pressure and the risk that we need to make sure we're mitigating against? And two, how would you encourage people to get started in thinking how to embrace the path of being a leader?
Yeah. So we'll start with the risk. I think the biggest risk that we have with the next generation that are coming into this industry is the concept of truthfulness. And what I mean when I say that is not that the next generation is untruthful, but I don't know if you're on Instagram or not, but how many posts and pictures do you see on Instagram of people's real life, the difficulties, the struggles, the things that they deal with, versus, hey, look at my new Ferrari, look at my new Rolex. Here's my wife and I on our best day and our best vacation. So it's warped people's sense of what success looks like.
Right.
And you're going to have a lot of people who just don't understand that you have to start from the bottom and build your way to the top. And you have to be on that continuum. You have to train, you have to learn. So I think that's going to be something that's going to bite us from the whole social media thing. And look, I'm not throwing shade on social media. I've worked for those companies. I hopefully support those companies now.
Yeah.
It's an important piece of life, and it really is a good tool for a lot of things, but getting people to understand that not every day is your best day. And how do you deal with that effectively? And how do you look at a trend over time of performance enhancement and growth versus in the moment? Because people are in the moment right now, very, manic type lifestyle of today was an awesome day because this thing happened. And then the next day you have a tough day and it's like, this is the worst day of my life. And they never can get out of that cycle and look at years or decades at a time and see that personal growth. We covered that earlier with some of the lumps we take being in this industry. Like, I've made bad decisions. I've had bad years. I've had terrible projects. I've had those things, but that's just a moment in time. And if I look at where I started right after that discussion with my wife and we moved back to Atlanta, the money I was making, the responsibility I had, the kind of projects I was doing versus what I'm doing now, there's obviously a positive trend in growth and capability and impact on the world and impact on the people around me. So I would encourage that we find a way to get people to widen their aperture to look at growth over time versus these daily things, because that's going to lead, if you stay in that daily mode, you're going to have high attrition. You're going to have people chasing the next best thing all the time and not really digging in and dedicated to something for a period of time. So I think that's a really big risk worldwide, globally, in every industry, but particularly in ours. And what do you say to that? lower skilled person, who's earlier in their career or maybe intermediate in their career, they want to grow, but they're afraid of failure. You have to model to them that failure is okay. Failure is just fine. Failure is how you learn. You learn through pain. You learn through struggle. There are other ways to learn, but the most lasting lessons that any of us learn in our life are from those bottom moments. When you have that bad day, when you make a bad decision, you feel that feeling in the pit of your stomach that you get when you screwed something up and you're going to have to stand tall before the man for it.
Right.
That's how you grow. But you only grow through that if you have a framework in which to evaluate those failures and own it. My definition, Jocko Willink's definition of ownership, which is, I just ripped it off straight from him, is you own it, you understand the impact, and then you develop a plan to not let it happen again.
Mm-hmm.
That's the true definition of growth. So I would work hard as a leader to take that fear of failure away and say, I'm going to put you in positions where you're probably going to fail. And that's okay, because I'm not going to come to you and beat you up. First place I'm going is to my bathroom mirror, and I'm looking in it and saying, okay, I put this person in this position. I didn't give them enough training. I didn't give them enough resources. I didn't really explain the goal well enough. All that stuff is on me. And I know it made you feel like you failed, but it's really my failure. But here's what I'm going to do about it to make sure that things are clearer and better next time. Now, you always get to the point where somebody's either unable or unwilling to take the steps they need to exit that failure loop. That's a totally different discussion. But somebody who wants to grow, they're going to take those steps, and you model that behavior to them. They're going to start to model that behavior. And that's how they learn from their failures, and they grow. And then the training piece is super important. Nobody spends enough time on leadership training, period.
Yeah.
Nobody. So, 30 minutes a week with your team, reading this book, looking at any number of resources that are out there for free, available all over the internet. You're going to remember some things. You're going to remember some language. You're going to remember some things to say, some things to do that are going to enhance your ability to grow and to do those things. I think we have to set aside time for that as leaders for our teams and say, hey, I want you to get better at this, and I'm going to give you resources and time to be able to get better at this. Yeah, that's the way I approach those types of situations.
And it obviously starts with your leaders. Like when you were talking about I wrote down a number of words here, but I just had this personal experience when you're talking about whatever the age or mindset is. I have 3 daughters in their 20s, and they're so smart, they're so capable, but they're also in some circumstances so ready to give up on something because they're not an expert in a week or whatever. And I just don't I got fired for 10 years or quit for 10 years after I got out of the service trying to figure out where my aptitude and my attitude met. Some things I love to do and I was terrible at. Some things I was great at and I couldn't stand doing it. But when that intersection hit, and it's different, some people knew, right out of the bat, you were obviously a capable mechanical engineer to go through Georgia Tech and whatever, and you've refined over time.
Not an engineer. I don't want to take credit for something I don't.
Fair enough.
I have a business degree from Georgia Tech, which is a little weird, but
that's okay. Fair enough. I bumped into somebody the other day from Emory that had like a law degree, and I'm like, you didn't get medical or business, you got law from Emory. But my point just is that. How do I get you into a mindset where you're not going to accomplish everything you want in the next month? And what kind of life would that be? But you're also not going to lose everything. Like, just work at it. And, but it is for sure that, but I think it comes back then to leadership, where your framework that you keep, whether it's Jocko's or any other that you establish for your organization, here's the framework. And what we're going to do, we see for the regular person, you land and you work through like this. And some of you might be accelerated and others, some elements might be harder, easier, whatever, depending upon your individual aptitudes. But now we can measure it. And so you can measure yourself. But if you don't keep pouring into people to do that, it just won't be successful. But if you are, we keep talking about a workplace shortage. I don't think we're the third most populated country on earth. We may not be able to staff every data center company, but if you could build a culture like this, where people, as they come on board or they join your organization and they hear these goals, they see these aspirations, but then they're also able to talk to their peers and say, I was just like you, I came in, here's where I'm at through the process. And they're able to connect to this mission and this bigger thing. And oh, by the way, pivot, because we're a really large organization with a lot of dynamic pieces. And I can keep those people that resonate with that framework. Well, there's not a workplace shortage for me. And we can keep those suppliers and those vendors that say, look, I can't serve everybody, but I dig these people. I get paid on time. My contracts aren't a hassle. My people come home safe. Every now and then I've got a mitigating circumstance and I need some grace. And these guys lead in whatever it is, I work through these things. And most of the time, and when they fail, they're transparent. They're, spectacularly transparent, and they take their own extreme ownership on how to do it better. And now you change the world.
Yeah, that's it. That's the secret. And it's all about that outward focus. It's all about trying to make people's lives better, finding ways to empower them and stretch them and help them grow without the risk of massive failure. Now, there's some failures that are inexcusable that you have to do something about. Mm-hmm. But most failures are not. And I would give you some advice for your daughters. I deal with the same thing with my 2 teenage kids, and I show them pictures of bodybuilders, and I'm like, you think this guy just woke up one day looking like this? Like, he's put years and years and years of work in this. And if he skips a couple of workouts because he goes on vacation, he ain't gonna lose all that.
Right.
Like it takes a long time to build it, and it takes a long time to lose it, with a few exceptions, right? I mean, there's some mistakes, some integrity violation type mistakes, or, really bad safety decisions, things like that can wreck you in an instant.
Right.
But I would think that if you're on that path of continual improvement and you're really introspective and you're making decisions that are outwardly focused, then the chances of those kinds of mistakes happening are reduced greatly, because you don't have your own interests at play. You're thinking about other people. Right.
Yeah. In your bodybuilding example, the great irony there is those muscles in that framework is 10,000 little micro tears and failures that rebuild to share the form that you want. When you watch a plane fly, it's constant micro adjustments. You don't shoot a perfect azimuth and do it. It's micro adjustments, and you want the plan around the micro adjustment. It usually takes, to bring a plane out of the sky or something, a series of catastrophic failures of a series of people not doing their jobs, violating SOP and MOP, unless you're, Joe Walker or, a test pilot or one of these other folks, Chuck Yeager, that's, by definition, pushing the envelope, an early astronaut or something. And you live in that world and you accept that risk. Even then they have these protocols. So it's, and not everybody has that same risk tolerance and aptitude. But I think if you have this thing that we've been talking about today, this culture of leadership, and we haven't said this word, but I think it's important, and you got to love your people. And I'm not trying to be melodramatic either with that, but you at least got to you've got to be in love with the idea that this is a serious responsibility that I'm entrusted with. How do I make sure that I help their life to the degree that they're able to, and I've got the skill to flourish? And if you have that combination of things, you'll get lucky.
You'll get lucky. You'll make your own luck.
Adam, thank you for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I appreciate it. Always a good time chatting with you. And this is honestly one of my favorite things to talk about. So thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure. Hey, if you guys liked it, subscribe. And if you loved it, like it, or whatever I meant. Have a great day. We'll see you, everybody. Have a good one.